Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, September 2nd. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by Captain Garry Scott of the Vermont State Police, where he's the director of the Fair and Impartial Policing Program and Community Affairs. Captain Scott, welcome to the News Project.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making the time for our conversation today. We're going to talk a little bit about the recent survey or study that Vermont State Police completed on traffic stops in 2019 and what those numbers indicate. So I guess just to get us started, can you walk us through what the numbers are saying and what takeaways the state police are taking from that?
Yeah, so we started as a state and as an agency to start to capture traffic stop data in about 2009-10. There was a community group up in the Chittenden County area that had filed a complaint and about traffic stops. So it created this sort of process of what we were capturing on traffic stops and how to go about it. By 2014, we were legislatively mandated to capture traffic stop data and report it to the legislators. So from 2010 to 2015, we were capturing the back of on a ticket of, the reason for the stop, whether someone was searched, was contraband found, was there an arrest? And in 2015, we released that data out to the public. And one of the things we quickly realized is we hadn't trained our members properly in how to capture that data up front and what it was we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. And so when it started to be analyzed by outside groups, we realized there was a lot of nuances in there that could be, you could not understand some of the things that were going on in a traffic stop. For instance, someone gets pulled over from a call of erratic operation, and our troopers may have checked that as a moving violation as opposed to an investigation stop, or someone's leaving a gas station and they drove off without paying for gas. That's not a discretionary stop. That's the troopers being told. So the members were checking those off incorrectly. Another part of that were the searches. As a trooper is walking up to the car, and the backseat passenger starts to move around and put something into a bag or hide it, and that becomes the focus of the search. The traffic stop data currently still only looks at the operator of the vehicle. So by 2015, we realized we had a bunch of these errors. In 2016, we created this position in the state police, the Director of Fair and Impartial Policing, and we're the only state police agency in the country that has this position. And part of it was to really help dig into our data, look at what we could do, how we could retrain our members, but most importantly, listen to lived experiences of Vermonters or people being stopped and what was happening to them. Because the data showed that there's not roughly 60,000 car stops a year. We're stopping around 1,500, 1,600 black operators and then searching a certain number. So even though there's still disparities in there. That's one thing we want to really look at is who is getting ticketed and who gets searched. There are disparate rates in there. One thing we have learned throughout the years and a conversation that has changed through multiple years looking at the data is the rate in which we stop people is appropriate to our driving population. And the data that's a difficult thing to really think about too. A lot of the early studies would only look at census data. And we can all recognize living in Vermont, we're a tourist state. We have a lot of outer-staters coming here, driving on our roadways. We see the outer-state plates. So census data and driving population are things that we really want to kind of start to figure out and what's more of a role in this data. So we've learned a lot of lessons since 2015. 2016, we create this position. And now I think the last 2 years, we've really got a good, clear picture of what our data is showing. But we do see disparate rates for people. If you're a black operator in the state, you're more likely to get a ticket than a white operator, and you're more likely to be searched. With that, the numbers are pretty small, so it's hard to really draw a lot of conclusions. We are able to dig into every single search and arrest of operators of color in Vermont. So we're able to really dig into how many arrests we had in 2019 and how many car stops and searches that we had.
how historically consistent is the data you're seeing in the last couple of years compared to when you began this program?
Yeah, that's one of the changes. Like our error ratings early on were very high because we had members not filling out the tickets completely. So now we have less than a 1% error ratings when it comes to our traffic stop data. So we're pretty confident in what we're pulling in. We still know there are some parts of missing data that we have to look through, or there's nuances. Commercial motor vehicles is an area where we frequently see some missing data because the ticket goes to the company and not the driver. So there's some things that are still out there, and anytime anyone who's worked with data will know there's these parts and facts that are just don't fit in nicely into the box the way we'd like them to. But the data, one of the important things is it's helped us having like Professor Seguino from UVM talk to us and be partnered with us has helped us to sort of show to our members these problems, these disparities that we see and talk about. And now it's really made it a little bit more real for people. So before of just hearing lived experiences or anecdotal experiences, now we have data that can show we do in fact write tickets at a higher rate to a person of color than we do white operators.
Now, is there also a discrepancy between when a car is searched during a stop? I guess not every time you do a traffic stop, you do a search of a car. But is there a racial disparity there too?
There is, compared to the percentage-wise, but in 2019 we made roughly 137 searches of vehicles. We stopped 58,000 cars in 2019. Excuse me. 2019 we stopped about 58,000 cars. We searched 137 of them, and of the 30 of that, only 14 searches were black operators. So it's a very small number, and the likelihood of being searched on the roadway this is just Vermont State Police numbers, is less than 1%. So when you get into those 14 searches, and that, as I mentioned before, that's exclusively looking at the operator of the vehicle. It doesn't take into consideration whether contraband was found on the passenger. So we have a find rate of about 70% of finding contraband, and that can be from illegal cigarettes on a juvenile driver to weapons and things that they shouldn't have, and drugs. So it's all over the place of what contraband means, and there can be different definitions, but it's a small number. We look at every single one of those. Of those 14, we were able to look even a little bit further, and we know that there was contraband found on passengers on 2 or 3 of those other stops. So the numbers go up, but it's still not percentage-wise fitting in the right way, the way we'd like to see it from year to year. So we'd like to see more of a crisscrossing or an equal line between the searches when it comes to these rates.
Okay. I guess I'm just curious, and probably this is a question that's probably occurred to every motorist that's ever driven a car. What prompts an officer to initiate a traffic stop? I mean, is it some of the obvious things like a broken taillight or something like that, or apparently defective equipment, or what happens to trigger the thought in the officer's mind that, hey, I got to stop this guy and ask him a question or two?
Sure. Yeah. So the stops are broken into different categories. Moving violations is the highest number of car stops that we have. They're roughly, about 37,000 of our car stops. Out of the 58,000, 37,000 are speeding, running a red light, egregious driving behavior that would result in the stops. And then the rest can fall into, the defective equipment. Not having your headlights on at night, not having, having a brake light out or tail light out. And then there's other categories that can instigate a stop. As we mentioned before, investigation stops and externally generated stop. Investigations are the convenience store has been held up and the suspicious vehicle has left the area, and that stops that vehicle. Or a domestic assault, and the person's in their car and they drive away. So we break them down into those different categories. So the majority are moving violations, and that's what we really look at with our data is the discretionary stops, the ones that the officer sees the violation and decides to stop that one car on the interstate that is speeding. And we all know that probably all the cars are speeding, but that one car is the one that the officer has decided is the worst of the bunch and is going to stop them. So there's one part of how it leads into a search. You're going to have a legitimate reason stop the vehicle. And in Vermont, we have case law that requires officers to have articulable reasons in order to ask someone to exit the vehicle, such as a crime occurring like DUI, or there's safety concerns. There may be weapons in the car that are visible, or drug paraphernalia. So those have to be articulated pretty clearly at the onset. And then from there, in order to get to the search of the car, you also have to articulate all those factors. So asking someone to exit the vehicle and asking someone to search the vehicle, you have to have those facts. And that's Supreme Court case law that is, part of how we do business in Vermont. That's not the same across the country, though. Each state has sort of different rules and regulations that they go through. So Massachusetts has things that are very different than Vermont and how we can search vehicles.
Interesting. I often wonder what goes on in the patrol car when a officer has stopped a vehicle for speeding or moving violation or whatever. I guess usually the officer gets out of the car and has a discussion with the driver. But then frequently I've seen where they go back into a car and probably have a conversation with headquarters or whatever. Is that what's going on? They're running a license plate number or something like that?
Sure. Yeah. So at the start of so some people wonder why it takes officers so long to pull them over sometimes. Like they see them in the U-turn and they go 2 miles down the road. So that's usually due to safety concerns of this. The officer usually knows the area, the trooper knows the area, and that's the safest spot for them to pull the car over and conduct the motor vehicle stop. So that's one factor that confuses people sometimes, is the troopers know the area and they want to be in a safe location where other traffic coming upon them, not coming around a curve or things like that. They may approach to the passenger side. That's usually safer too, so you're not standing out in the traffic or the roadway, depending on if there's a guardrail there. So they'll come up on the passenger side and walk around the back, and that's just a safety thing, so they're not going to get hit by a car. So people see the blue lights and sometimes they get in a little close, they don't pull over. You have to provide your license, your registration, your insurance card. And then they'll move back to when they go back to the car, they can on the in-car computer, they can run your license, which is a Vermont, and if it's an out-of-state, it will check both those, your registration of your car to see, and then they're looking to see if your insurance paperwork is valid. All those things come back in a normal stop; those are all valid. Then they issue the ticket or the warning of where they're going to go. So normal traffic stops take about 7 minutes from start to finish.
Did your data, is it broken out to show if there are more like out-of-state drivers who get pulled over compared to Vermonters, or is it statistically insignificant?
Yeah, we did see a lot. So our data when it comes to arrests and car stops, the majority of our car stops are on the interstate. That's what we're seeing the majority, and high percentage of searches and arrests, particularly black operators. And what we saw this year, when we broke it down, we had 50 arrests of black operators for the Vermont State Police in 2019. 28 of those arrests occurred in the Chittenden County area, right outside of Burlington. And a high percentage, like over almost close to 80%, were out-of-state plates. So then it starts to think not so much of a racial issue, but maybe a demographic issues of out-of-state drivers cutting through Vermont, going from Montreal to Boston in an area, that area outside of Burlington is a 55-mile-an-hour zone. So we had very high speeds, 90, 100 miles an hour. So the arrests themselves were pretty legitimate and pretty egregious driving behavior, and all really condensed in one area that we saw. So it is interesting that anecdotally we're starting to see that the out-of-state plates moving through Vermont do drive a little bit faster than are getting ticketed by the troopers.
Have you formed any theories on why more Black or Asian or minority operators get stopped? I mean, is there any theory behind that? Why that is? Because I'm assuming this has been fairly consistent over the past 10 or so years since you've been tracking this.
Yeah, I think that we have to look that we have a societal issue of inherent and structural institutional racism that is just embedded in all parts of our culture. And so we get our members from society. And what we try to do is, with the messaging of, as we're recruiting them, that they of the values of our organization. We want to make sure that they understand that the core values is that we're treating people fairly. So recruiting into the hiring process to how we sort of onboard them, and then the training that we do. So all of the biases that they have and brought with them from growing up and being in society, we try to make sure at least educationally that they understand that they exist. And then from there, that they acknowledging them, hopefully they are not applying them to members of the public. But I think that's ultimately what we're seeing is that this is a big, big problem, and it's not just in policing, it's in housing and medical, it's everywhere in education. And we want to make sure our members are aware of it. But I think that implicit bias is still a big, big factor. And we're continually looking to make this, it's a big priority. As I said earlier, we're the only state police agency that has a command position of this title that is, and continuously posting our data for the public to see. You're not seeing other state police agencies around the country publicly posting their data every year. So we're trying to do this, be as transparent as we can, and have a hard conversation about it. But the fact of the matter is, this disparities are here, and if we have to address it, we have to continue to talk about it. And our belief is that educational part will be what drives it down. And we have seen some success, but it is still frustrating. And we do have steps to go forward. I am retiring this year, and so when I leave, we've named my replacement will start in November, and we also have brought on a civilian, Dr. Eitan Nasreddin-Longo, as a co-chair of our Fair and Impartial Policing Committee, so of the position. So civilian hired by the state police, the two of them to do the work, to continue to do community outreach, continue to train our troopers, and continue to look at all these problems that have been a part of our agency.
On the training side, I guess, can you describe some of those changes that maybe going into the training background that officers get compared to, let's say, 5 or 10 or 20 years ago? I mean, it sounds like you're trying to put more emphasis on being kind of sensitive to these racial issues to make sure that you're stopping a driver for a valid reason, as opposed to just some sort of, implicit racism of some sort or another.
Yeah, so we've had a Fair and Impartial Policing Committee since 2009, made up of community members from around the state. And one of the early things we really learned is to train our members to explain to people why they're being stopped right away. So when the trooper walks up to the side of the car to say, "Hey, I'm Trooper Scott, and the reason I stopped you today was you were speeding. I got you at 75 and the 55 here. Can I have your license?" So then that dispels that part of why they're being stopped. But we have designed our training based on lived experiences of our community and bringing community members in to do the training. So Curtis Reed from Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity is part of our training staff for our new troopers. Tabitha Moore from the NAACP has been part of designing training. Dr. Nasreddin-Longo also does training. So having community members lead the training about the lived experiences that they've experienced and they're hearing from our communities helps drive the training. And we're not just doing it ourselves thinking we have the answers as a policing agency. We have been following this model of listening to our communities for many, many years. And I think that's why we have a good reputation amongst Vermonters of how we're doing our work. But that's part of what it is. It's being driven by community voices and participation of community members of what is specific to Vermont and the challenges and lived experiences they're hearing. And then our members, it's not some far away land. That's happening in their community. And our troopers live in the community. They know these people, who they're dealing with, so that makes it a little bit more real, and you have to really listen to that.
I was wondering, given the whole current environment right now around Black Lives Matter and defunding police departments and all that sort of thing, or rather, so it's more accurate to say substituting funding for other types of personnel like mental health workers or social workers. I guess, how is that affecting recruiting police officers or into the state police? Is that having any apparent effect or none?
It's a significant challenge, right? I think this atmosphere. So one thing is we're not properly funded now. Like, we're not a 24-hour agency. You know, it's 2020 heading into 2021. There are we're the primary police agency for the state of Vermont, so we cover the majority of, 80% of the landmass and over 50% of the population. And at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, the troopers go home and they're on call. So we're not even a 24-hour agency today. We have been advocating for mental health workers for many, many, many years. We have 2 of them currently in the St. Albans and Westminster barracks, where they go out and work with troopers. So the defunding part, fortunately, the legislators have already recognized that we're not funded properly as it is. We have just over 300 troopers covering the entire state, and we are the primary police agency. So that's something that is a big factor. And recruiting is definitely, there's a sentiment, an anti-law enforcement sentiment that is very natural. We hear it and we understand why it's occurring. What happened to George Floyd was a crime. And so police accountability has to be a big part of that, and making sure we have processes and listening to communities and how we do our internal affairs, how we handle complaints. That is showing to the public we're taking it very seriously, and hopefully it's showing to members that maybe want to be part of the change of their communities or participate in the process, that we take it very seriously and we're very transparent about it. Like, if you want to file a complaint against a trooper, it's right on our webpage. You can go to social media. So there's lots of avenues, and it's not a secret on how to do that. But it definitely is challenging to get people to want to come into this career right now. And I think, and we recognize it's going to change. In the next 5 years, law enforcement, the face and how we do business is going to change. But I think we're just at a crossroads right now, and and law enforcement has to own their part of this, like what they have done and been a part of this process for many years, and what they own of how communities of color and marginalized communities have been treated by law enforcement. So that's a part of the conversation, and being open about it hopefully brings people in who want to be part of that change.
One of the comments I've heard is that, well, in theory, it sounds like a nice idea to bring in like a mental health worker or a social worker to assist police forces, but if you're going out on a call, on an emergency call, where you don't know what kind of situation you're getting into, you're still going to need to have a regular uniformed officer. So it's not an easy task to just simply say, okay, we'll take 10% of the uniformed officers and we'll substitute in the social workers. You're still kind of in need of having an officer who is prepared to handle almost any kind of situation that might develop, I would assume.
Right, and I think that, so those are acute situations, and that's sort of like bringing the officer in the presence can sort of de-escalate and bring that situation down. And then we sort of look at it as a tag team or a team approach. So now the sort of chaos of the situation has calmed, and now the mental health worker can come in and start to actually do the other part. So it's not just one all the way in. And having the mental health workers is very valuable to sort of now, all right, what is the real problem here, and what resources do we really need to get? Once it's sort of safe and normalized, that's how the team works really well together. And then a lot of calls, even beforehand, even getting to police interaction, is really where we should be looking at how mental health workers, like working with schools and understanding the complexities that are occurring in a home from the school, because the school teachers and social workers understand that, and there may be criminal activity occurring in homes. So it's all working together with, the law enforcement agency has to be working in conjunction with all of these resources to provide the best outcome for our community members. But it can't just be one or all. And I think the point you're bringing, that a lot of this has been dumped on law enforcement for a long, long time. And I testify a lot at the State House, and we have been advocating for, more training for our officers, more de-escalation training, more mental health workers. So these aren't new conversations to the Vermont State Police, and we have been advocating for that for quite some time.
Pivoting a bit from purely a traffic stop question, I was just thinking, since last March, when the COVID pandemic shut things down economically and all the rest, I was wondering, are you seeing any trends since then, like upticks in any particular types of crimes, or or maybe the reverse is happening, or maybe there are fewer people going out, so there are fewer crimes being committed. Any sense of what's going on there, in the relatively 4 or 5 months since we've been going through the pandemic?
Yeah, it's tough to say exactly because the year is still not over on where everything is. But we did, anecdotally, I think we saw, people being home and the unemployment started. We saw a lot of home disturbances, family disturbances calls. We are seeing an uptick in fatal motor vehicle crashes this year. I don't know if you can contribute that to COVID or not. But so domestic violence, spousal abuse calls were up, just family disturbance calls went up during that time. So it's tough to say exactly right now, but I think that as far as the feeling of it is that we did see, people were home more and sort of at their homes more. And I think you saw some, family, friction that did occur and that would bleed over to calls for service that way. So we stayed pretty busy throughout the whole spring and the summer.
And sort of one final question, seatbelts have been an issue. I know you folks have worked at very hard over the years. We're finally seeing seatbelt compliance finally getting close to 100%, or is that still
no? It's that's a challenge, and that's always been the challenge. I think I don't have the exact fatal numbers in front of me, but I know we're over 40 this year, and a high percentage of those are people not wearing their seatbelts and not properly belted. And unfortunately, I know there's a sort of a libertarian view to that sometimes, but the big picture of that is most people do survive the car crash and they don't have their seatbelt on. They suffer significant injuries or injure other people in the car. They become the big object that rolls around and crashes into their spouse or their kids. And so the injury portion of that, and having a seatbelt on, just keeping yourself in your seat, can reduce a significant amount of the injuries and the burden to taxpayers. We, as taxpayers, have to pick it up when someone is significantly injured. So, but we are not seeing, the compliance rates are in the 80% range-ish, and we'd like to see that go higher for people. But that's just one of those struggles we have faced for a long time in Vermont, of trying to get people to wear their seatbelts.
Interesting. Well, it sounds like the trends are going in the right direction. It sounds like you're getting that discrepancy between the races getting a little bit closer. I guess, is there any kind of number one priority going forward to next year that you want to see have happen in terms of the traffic stops, just to conclude on that note?
Yeah, I think that we recognize and we are hearing that the lived experiences of communities of color in Vermont is very different than white Vermonters. And that's a big part of this. So the traffic stop data is just one piece of the puzzle. We look at it holistically of all of the things that are occurring, and hearing from our members, that are afraid, hearing from community members that are afraid to be in their house. That's the bigger picture, and how we can engage with them to make sure they get the proper resources. Like bias incidents, that's a big part of this too. Like, having a sign or a person walking around with a weapon, and then if you're a person of color just being terrified, even though there may be not a criminal element that we can pinpoint that to, but making sure we can be a resource for that person, that they feel comfortable coming to the police. That's a big hurdle because a lot of communities do not feel comfortable. And then when they come to us, that we provide them the proper resources. And that's really where I think as an agency, we want to continue to move forward in that area, to be a resource for people that we haven't always been the best resource for. And so working with the Attorney General's office, working with the Human Rights Commission, working with the ACLU, U.S. Attorney General's office, to get resources to people that need them that they haven't traditionally had.
All right. Well, Captain Scott, thank you so much again for your time. I really appreciate your explaining all of this to us, and congratulations on the coming retirement.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.